while I do that also. As I said, I just ended like 3 seconds before I joined you, I ended that session. So I'm not copied their files. I'll copy that and give you, but I'll also talk while I'm doing that. So yesterday we had tried out an example on reflection, the last example that we had tried out. And in that example, I had asked you all to just display all the values out there. Correct? So just out of curiosity, did you all try doing that? Showing all the things in the, from properties and not property. I think I'd asked you to do methods and all the parameters of that method. So did you all try that out? Just give me a quick yes, no, if you've done that.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to complete that example today, where I'm going to be showing you how you can, using reflection, create an object of some class. 1 second. Without adding a reference, right? But using reflection, you can actually go and directly, work with that. So we're not going to add a reference. We're going to directly load the assembly at runtime, create an object of the class at runtime, and work with it. Okay. So that's the example that I have for you here. Yeah, the files are being copied. Let me share my screen. So what I have here is so what I have here is an assembly that contains this class. So I have a class called tax calculator, and it's an assembly called UK calculator. So the situation that I'm presenting to you is, consider this situation. Let's say you're creating a sort of like a payroll package. Okay. And the payroll package that you're creating should work for different countries. Now, when you're writing the code for the payroll package, you want to make it work with different possible, tax rules for different countries. Now, the Indian tax rules would be different from, let's say, the UK tax rules, which would be different from maybe the US tax rules. So the way in which tax calculations would happen in all of these classes would be different. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run some, code wherein I will ask the user to choose which assembly he wants to work with. So let's say he chooses, I want to work with the UK calculator, right? Now in the UK calculator, I'm firstly setting the salary. So that salary has been shown as 10,000. And then I'm calculating what is the net salary based on different conditions that I might have out here. Okay. Now, similarly, just like I have a UK calculator, I also have a India calculator. So there's an assembly for the India calculator as well. And if I call the India calculator, setting the same value, let's say 10,000 was the salary, but now this time the calculated salary is coming out as 20,000. So what I'm doing is I'm actually loading the assembly at, runtime. And then I have a third calculator called a US calculator. And if I run this now the calculated value is different out here. So I'm loading this assembly at runtime and calling code on that. I don't have a reference to those assemblies initially. Okay. And this is the code that I have in my those classes. So I'm showing you for UK calculator. So UK calculator returns what? This is the basic salary. It returns net salary as basic into 1.25,
1.25.
right? But if I did it for US was basic into 1.5 and India calculator was basic into 1 into 2. So double of the basic. So the structure of the code is the same, but the code in it is different. Okay. And I'm writing code using reflection to load an assembly at runtime and then work with it. Now, supposing I was not doing it with reflection, supposing I was normally doing this, my code would look like this. My code would look like something like this. Create an object of the tax calculator class, set the basic, read the basic, and get the net salary. This is what I would be doing in here. Agree? So
Yes, sir.
my start point would be I create an object of tax calculator out here. But if I'm doing this with reflection and I'm loading the assembly at runtime, then I will not be able to write this code. I will not get tax calculator at all. Why will I not get tax calculator? Why would I not get, the tax calculator class? Why will I not have that to write the first line? Why would I not have that? Yes, while writing code, why would I not have that is my question. Before you can use the class, what do you need to do? What do we need to do before we can use any class?
Create an object.
Right. If the class is in a different assembly, then what do we need to do? Using will not work. First, what do you need to do? First step. You're not telling me the first step. You have to add a reference. No?
File main need to, but DLL we don't have an entry point.
No. This is unrelated code, unrelated statement that you're making. I'm asking you, what is your name? You're telling me sky is blue. The statement that you made is not wrong, but has no connection with the question that I asked. My question is, if you have to use another assembly, what is the first step? You have to add a reference. Or in case of external assemblies, you have to do a NuGet. And that NuGet adds that assembly into your code. So if it's your local assembly, you add a reference. Now, if you cannot add a reference, then you cannot write code like this. All right. So if you look at the code that I have here, right? I'm doing it in the WinForms because I want to show the dialog box. My first part of the code is showing that dialog box where the user can choose the file that he wants to load out here. And after he loads that, I'm going to now load that assembly at runtime. So I have not added a reference to it. So I'm adding the assembly, loading the assembly at runtime. Now this is very similar to the code that you wrote yesterday. Yesterday we had hard coded this value. Instead of hard coding this value, what am I doing now? Where is this picking it up from? Where is this picking it up from? When I click here, what is it doing? Where is it picking up from? Where is the file name being picked up from? No, from the file that the user chooses out here. This is the open file dialog box. So whatever file that he chooses here, that is the file that I'm opening. Right? So this is what I'm doing. This is I'm not hard coding a value. Unlike yesterday. Yesterday, what did we do? We hard coded a value. So that's my assembly that I'm loading. Now, after loading the assembly, I want to do this. I want to write down this code, but I cannot write this code. Why can't I write this code? Why can't I use a tax calculator class? Because I have not included that assembly. So creation of an object in this manner is ruled out. I cannot do that. So to create it using reflection, see what I'm doing. the first thing that I'm doing is I'm calling assembly.getType. Yesterday you called get types, which gave you all the types. But now I'm doing what? Get type, which is giving me a single type. And which type am I getting? Firstly, assembly name dot tax calculator. So this is the name of the class that I'm loading. Now, once you have the type out here, to create an object of that type, I'm going to use activator.create instance. An activator.create instance returns an object. So this is the object that I want. So these two lines are equivalent to doing what? Equivalent to doing this line. But I'm not getting it as a tax calculator. I'm getting it as what? As an object out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? How to create an object using reflection.
So in line number 31, what are these two values true, true that
I'll come to that. I'll come to that.
Okay.
I'll explain that. But are we clear on what we have done essentially here? Line number 31 and 33 are a replacement for line number 29.
29.
Because I cannot do line 29 directly. So I'm doing it, at runtime, I'm loading the assembly. I'm loading the assembly here. And from the assembly, now I'm creating an object of one of the classes in that assembly. This is what we've done up to this point. Okay. Now the other parameters here was if this tax calculator class was not there, should this line throw an exception or not? So if given true, this line would throw an exception, will throw an error. If it could not find that tax calculator class. That's what this is doing. Second parameter is should you ignore case or not. For example, if I had written tax calculator here and in that assembly it was capital C, whether ignore case or not is working or not. So I'm just setting both to true, right? Ignore the error. I mean, throw an exception if an exception occurs. If you cannot find that. And second one is ignore the uppercase and lowercase. All right. So this is the first thing that we have done. Created a object of that class. Now the next step that I want to do here is I actually want to do obj.basic equal to 1000, 10,000. But if I did obj dot, what would I get here? What would I get here now? What am I getting with obj dot?
Method of object class.
Method of object class. I don't get the methods of the actual object that is holding. Are we clear on this? So now how do I set this value? To set this value, again, I'm going to use this property info that we talked about yesterday. So the type dot get property, single property. Yesterday you tried properties. This get single property returns this basic property info out here. Now, after I have this property info, to call the line, what do I want to actually do? Obj.basic equal to 10,000. So to do that, I'm going to be doing p.setValue. So property.set value for which object? For which object are we doing this? For obj
object.
And second thing is, what is the value that you're setting? Value here I'm setting as 10,000. Now the third parameter is something which says, are you using an indexer or not? So I'm not using an indexer in this example. But if I was using an indexer, the indexer would have to be passed out there. I have not covered an indexer with you or how to create an indexer. We have talked about what is an indexer without actually seeing the code for that. There's a lot pending. I've got a lot of stuff to finish. Hopefully I finish it in time. All right. So that's setting the value. So this is like writing a obj.basic equal to 10,000. Now after that, I want to do messagebox.show obj.basic. I want to do this. So you remember that first message box that came up when I ran it, which showed me 10,000. So yes, this is the line that is doing it. This is the line that is doing it. So instead of P dot set value. What am I now doing? P dot
Value.
get value for which object and for which indexer. So this is like doing a read the obj.basic. It's calling the get for it. Get for this object. So this is the message box that first showed me 10,000. Are we clear on how to access the property?
Yes, sir.
Similarly, now I want to call what? obj.getNetSal. I want to call this method. But I cannot call it directly. So I call p.getMethod. And you have tried yesterday get methods. So p.getMethod, which returns the method info. Which method are we trying to get information for? Get net salary. That is the method that we have written here. This method here. Now, after getting the method info, this is how I'm actually calling it. Method info.invoke. So call this method for which object. And if the method has any parameters, then the parameters can be passed out here. All right. The method didn't have any parameters. So, I kept it simple here. And this is the second message box that you saw, which show the calculated salary for that particular object. So this is how you could actually at runtime load this. Questions, if any? Now, what if this method here? What if this method here had some parameters? Let's say it had int I, comma int j. What if it had two parameters? In such a case, what you'll need to do is, first thing is whatever parameters that method has, put them into an object array. Right? So object ARR params, what is this doing? Creating an object array which is containing all the parameters. And while invoking it, instead of passing null, like we have passed null here, instead of passing null, what do we pass now here? Second parameter would be the array of whatever parameters that we had out there. So this would be if the method had any parameters. Okay. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So basically we are means in this example we are creating a calculator. So rather than passing an object array, can we pass an integer array? Will this accept it?
The problem is that the method dot invoke this here requires an object array as a parameter.
Okay. So if by mistake someone passes an integer, then it will throw an exception and something like that.
Yeah, so it would not allow me to do that. This method is not allowing me that. The method says I need an object array. Why an object array? Because even though you might be having integers in your method there, the problem is that it needs, it doesn't know this is going to be called for any function. So what if you had a string out there? So object array is what is saying that you can pass anything that you want out. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, there's one more, I'm keeping it fairly simple. I can actually make it more complex and, take care of every possibility, but let's keep it very simple. If you understand this concept, then you can build on it and do it on your own later. Now, in this example, I had only one method with the same name. Can we have two methods with the same name? Can we have two methods having the same name?
So in get method, we are not passing any parameters, right?
Not get. I'm talking about this method name get net salary. And my question is, can we have two methods having the same name?
Yes, sir.
What is
Yes,
that called?
sir.
What are you doing then? You're
Overloading.
overloading the method with different parameter names, with the different parameter types. So if you had two methods having the same name, Then see what I'm doing. I'm creating an array of types and specifying what are the data types for that method and passing that array of types as the second parameter of that t.get method. So supposing I want to call getNet salary, which took an int and a string as a parameter. So I'll have to pass it this way. Supposing I wanted something which took no parameters, then what will this line be? It didn't have any parameters. Then what will this line be? What are the size of this array then in that case? No parameters would be what? Would be 0. If it had one parameter, then 1. And then if it has one parameter, ARR types of 0 would be the type of the parameter. Now this I have written code for a method that has 2 parameters. First parameter of type int, second parameter of type string, and pass that array out. So this is how you'll work for overloaded functions. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
So this is the absolute basics of how you could use reflection. You can make it a little more complex example also. I could have made it even more user friendly. I could have asked him to choose the assembly, then showed him which classes are there in the assembly and asked him to choose from one of the classes. Can I show him all the classes in the assembly?
Yes,
Yes
sir.
or no? You have written that code yesterday. So show him a list box which shows him all the classes in the assembly. Ask him to select one class from there. Then instead of hard coding this class name as get, where is it gone? Tax calculator, I could pick up based on what value he wants. Then from that class, can I pick up all the properties out there? Can I show him all the properties from the class? You've done that yesterday. Then from the properties, ask him to choose one property. Then specify values for that property. All of this can be very generic and can be, we can write more code. Of course, here we're using a WinForms example. In my case, console app would not be a good way of doing this. But you need to have a little knowledge of WinForms as well to try such an example. But it can be made as complex as you want it to. This is a very simple hello world type example that I'm taking. All right, but that is how this is one place where reflection could be used. I don't expect you to spend too much time on this. Look at what it's doing, understand what it's doing, and if required at a later point of time, then use this. This is not the standard way of writing code. This will come up in specific situations where you want to make your code so generic that the assembly to be loaded also is being called at runtime. In such situations, you'll make it. Otherwise, most standard code I would not expect you to write this. So know what it does, but don't waste too much time on it, right? Any questions before we move away from this example? All right. So I'll go away from here and I will share this code with you. All right. Let's move on to, actually, I want to work with ASP.NET MVC next. But in ASP.NET MVC, a lot of the operations that we'll be working with will be interacting with the database. So I can actually do databases inside ASP.MVC also. I can write code in there also. But what I found is that tends to confuse you, because then you need to know the ASP.NET MVC concept and the database concept. You're learning two things together that generally ends up confusing you. So I'm going to take up this code, but I am going to use this code as is without making a lot of changes in ASP.NET MVC. And we're going to see how to connect to a database. Now, while connecting to a database, you can connect to any database. So you all have, I think, worked with Oracle or MySQL. What have you done?
MySQL. Sir.
MySQL. So you can connect to any database. But generally, when you work with .NET and .NET projects, SQL Server gives you the maximum features in .NET. So there are a lot of features in SQL Server which are .NET enabled, and vice versa. There are a lot of features in .NET that specifically only work with SQL Server. They also work with databases, other databases you can connect to, but a lot of features that are meant for SQL Server. And majority of the projects that you'll be working with, I would say 95% of the projects are actually using SQL Server. So I'm going to also show you how to connect to SQL Server. Okay. So we'll create a dummy database in SQL Server and work with that as well. And you're free to try out other code on your own. How to connect to the other database, that was also okay. But main thing is we'll try how to work with SQL Server here. That would be an additional point of learning for you. Now, before we get into writing any code or connecting to SQL Server or doing anything, let's try and understand how things work in here. How exactly are how's your front end connecting to your database? So if I take up the scenario pre-.NET, before .NET actually came in, right? The problem is that how does any front end talk to any database, right? So these are not .NET front ends necessarily, but any front end. Right? And the problem is almost as if saying that, what if everybody is speaking a different language and you still want to communicate with each other, because each database would have its own way of storing data, would have its own data formats. Each front end would have its own, way of sort of protocol or whatever else that it's using, whatever, way of working it is there. So everybody right now, it's almost as if everybody is speaking different languages. So for example, if I just give me 3 languages, whatever, let's say, I'll take up foreign languages here, French, maybe another.
Spanish, German.
Spanish, German, I'll accept that. All right. And 3 regional languages that we use here. Something that all of you will speak majorly in, but I don't want it to speak in. Right. Hindi and whatever, some other language.
Tamil.
Gujarati.
Gujarati, Tamil, whatever. You take your pick. All right. If you had a room full of people trying to do this, how would they speak to each other?
Regional languages.
This guy knows only French. This guy knows only Marathi. This guy knows only Spanish. Knows only Hindi.
Using
so
translator.
Okay, now the problem with the translator is, if you're trying to do this, you'll need to have a translator here who speaks French and Marathi. But this translator will not work for French to Hindi. So you need to have this out here, and a French to Tamil, and a Spanish to Marathi, and a Spanish to Hindi, and a Spanish to Tamil. And this is not a scalable approach. Meaning what? Might work for a few. But what if there are 50 front ends and 50 databases? So is this going to be practical to keep track of each front end? What if a new front end comes up? What if a new database comes up? You'll have to again develop translators for them. So this is not a scalable approach. What is the other approach that you can use?
Put one guy in middle who knows
Only
language
one
and
translator.
another knows common language.
Other way around. Instead of putting one guy in the middle who knows everything, that's also not possible. You have a common language. How are we all communicating in here?
English.
In English, right? At least that was what I think. I don't know what happens later after my session ends. I don't know how we all communicate. Anyway, so the solution is, you say that there is a common language, and now the onus is on whom? On these people to learn that language. So if you don't know the common language, if you can't interact with the common language, then you cannot participate in the conversation. As simple as that. So now coming back to a technical perspective, instead of saying languages out here, one of the earliest common such protocols that was used was ODBC, right? And ignore the Marathi, French and all of that. Obviously, that's not happening. But if a database had to talk to ODBC, the database needed to have what is known as a ODBC driver. And the database manufacturer would provide this ODBC driver, which allowed your database to talk to ODBC, right? So ODBC could communicate with the database using the ODBC driver. And each of these databases would now provide their own ODBC driver. Okay, so they need to learn only ODBC. They don't need to learn anything else. Right? All of these are the drivers. The front end also had to interact with ODBC. So the front end, instead of directly talking to it, would use some library to talk to ODBC. And the libraries that the front ends use in the earlier days were RDO or DAO. And RDO stood for the Remote Data Object Model. DO stood for the Data Access Object Model. All of these are technologies which are way back, probably before the time that you are born. Okay, so these are really, really old technologies. Don't even need to know about it or whatever. The front end talk to this, and then this talk to the database. I mean, to the ODBC and ODBC to the database. Right now, another sort of similar scenario was picked up, where you came up with another similar concept, where instead of using ODBC, the protocol that was used now was OLADB. Now, OLADB was considered to be a lighter protocol, a better protocol, a protocol that worked faster than ODBC, and you could actually connect to a database using OLADB now. Instead of a ODBC driver, instead of a ODBC driver out here that we had, now we had what? What did we have instead? OLADB provider. Okay, that's the term. So the terminology changes, but essentially it's doing the same thing. What does the OLADB provider allow you to do? Allows the database to talk to OLADB. And the libraries that the front end use was called as ADO or ActiveX data objects. So what is ADO replacing actually? Replacing DO or RDO. Right. So this was the scenario that came in a little later. And this was the prevailing scenario at the time when .NET came in. You could connect to a database either using ODBC or using OLADB. Now, both these technologies, right, were At that time, the only ones available. But .NET said that we will come up with a better option out here, right? And the option that we come out with will be using what is known as an OLEDB provider, sorry, as a managed provider, right? As a managed provider. Now, what is the concept of a managed provider out here? Firstly, the word managed itself, what does that imply? What do the managed providers imply?
It is
It manages all the
CLR
services.
company.
It is managed by the
by the
CLR.
CLR.
Correct. Managed by the CLR, right? So code that runs under .NET managed by the CLR, more efficient code. And now they're saying that if you have a .NET front end, you can connect to your database using a managed provider for that database. And this managed provider for the database will have to be given by the database manufacturer. So Oracle would have to provide its own managed provider. SQL Server will give its own managed provider, or MySQL will give its own managed provider. And this managed provider would allow .NET code to talk to your database. Now, what if the database didn't give a managed provider? Now, in such case, you still had backward compatibility for connecting via OLEDB or ODBC. So you could still connect via OLEDB, ODBC, describing the approach that we used earlier. But these approaches were not as efficient as using a managed provider. So first option should always be what? In .NET, first option is
Managed provider.
try and use a managed provider. But if you don't have the managed provider, some of the old databases may not have that. Then next best option, OLEDB. If it doesn't also support OLEDB, the next best option, ODBC. If it doesn't support either of the three, we cannot connect to the database. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
But most of these databases will have a managed provider. All of them will have your managed provider. Okay. All right. Now look at this part here also. The libraries that you're using to access them are also changing. In the earlier case, it was RDO, DO for ODBC. In case of OLEDB, it was called as ActiveX Data Objects or ADO. Now, when you came to .NET, they said that we will not use ADO also. We will rewrite the libraries for .NET. And the reason that they said we will rewrite it for .NET is because they said that those older libraries that are there are COM-based libraries. And COM libraries, I mean, COM code ideally, should not be used in .NET because of the problems that COM comes up with. Are we clear on this? So they said we will rewrite this whole library also. We'll rewrite this whole library and we will call it as ADO.NET. So what is ADO.NET? The set of libraries that you're using in .NET to connect to your database. What is the full form of ADO.NET?
ActiveX data object.
Data object.NET.
Wrong answer. Trick question. ADO.NET does not have a full form. So ADO.NET just simply implies that these libraries are doing the job of what was earlier being done with what? By whom? By ADO. But ADO full form is ActiveX Data Objects. That ActiveX is a COM technology. When you use ActiveX, you're using COM. And in .NET, we are not using COM. So the name is ADO.NET. But it does not have a full form. It just simply indicates what? Whatever you're doing in ADO earlier, now we are doing it with .NET as ADO.NET. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is the scenario that we have. This is the scenario that we have. Now, how do we connect to the database? What are the classes that we use in ADO.NET. Let's try and understand these out here. Okay, now I have a finished diagram. I normally would have liked to draw it with you, but we are already behind time. So I'm going to pick up this diagram. If you're going to be working with .NET framework, look at the section on top. Then the libraries that you would work with are in these namespaces: system.data.sql client, system.data.oldb, system.data.odbc. As the name suggests, what will oldb connect to? In this case, here we'll connect to what?
Databases.
That are using oldb. Similarly, ODBC will be used to connect to ODBC drivers, ODBC layer, right? And this is mainly included for backward compatibility. Generally, nobody uses OLEDB and ODBC anymore because most databases always have their managed provider. The third thing that would be coming to you by default with the .NET framework would be system.data.sql client. Now, the system.data.sql client for .NET framework, I'm being very specific. This is for .NET framework only, not for .NET Core, only for .NET framework. The system.data.sql client is pre-installed when you install the .NET framework. All these three libraries are pre-installed. So when you install the .NET framework, you're already getting this library. Okay, but these libraries do not work with .NET Core. They only work with .NET framework. Which libraries am I talking about? These first three libraries. Okay, what if you want to install, you want to use, what is system.data.sql client? What is this one? What is this one out here? Is what?
Managed provider.
Managed provider for SQL Server. Now, if you want to use the managed provider for, let's say, MySQL, then you have to download it from the net. It will not be directly available to you. If you have to download the managed provider from Oracle, you have to get it from their website. You will not have it by default in the .NET framework. So this is the scenario that you have with the managed providers for .NET
SQL
framework.
Server.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
SQL client, as you mentioned, that is for SQL Server, basically because SQL Server was created by
Correct.
Microsoft. That's why
Correct.
this is default.
That is why they are giving it to you by default, because they're saying that, we want you to use it. They're gently or not so gently suggesting to you that use this. Are we clear on this? So this comes in with your framework itself. But any other providers that you need, you have to download them. Now, when we come to .NET Core, things are different. In .NET Core, so turn your attention towards the right-hand side. The name of the library that we're using, the provider that we're using is different. It is not called system.data.sql client. It is called Microsoft.data.sql client. And this Microsoft.data.sql client does not come pre-installed out here. You have to do a NuGet on it. Do you remember NuGet from yesterday? Yesterday we had to do a NuGet for some package. For SOAP, we had to do this. So if you'll have tried out a NuGet, then similarly you'll have to do NuGet today for Microsoft.data.sql client. And what is Microsoft.data.sql client? This is the provider that is going to be used by .NET Core. Now, this has been written in such a way that it can be also used by .NET Framework. So you can use it both places. .NET Core also you can use it, .NET Framework also you can use it. Right? This one and this one are totally different in terms of the libraries that are there, the way they have been written. But the methods that you're calling, the code that you're calling, are exactly the same. There's no change in the code. Only the actual implementation of that code internally is different. But both of them are doing exactly the same thing. So the code that you write will remain the same. Now, similarly, if you wanted to do a NuGet for, if you want to include anything, you have to first do a NuGet for that. So if you want to connect via OLEDB, ODBC, any of these other technologies, you still need to do a NuGet on those packages. They don't come pre-installed here when you're working with .NET Core. Are we clear on this? Everybody? Questions, if any, about how to include the package, what packages to include and how to include, and which package to use where. Are we clear with this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now let's get down into the actual code that you will write. So first step is you include the package that you need to include. Second step is you now start writing code. Now the code that you write will be fairly similar, irrespective of which database you're connecting to or which sort of library you're using. The code that you write will be similar. So thank God for that. It's not going to be different for different databases. Okay. Now, the topmost class that you use while connecting to the database, the first thing that you'll do is establish a connection to the database. Now, to establish a connection to the database, you'll use the connection class, but there is no class called connection. The name of this class will depend upon what you're connecting to. So if you're connecting to SQL Server, the name of the class becomes SQL connection. If you're connecting to MySQL, the name of this class is MySQL connection. If you're connecting to Oracle, then the name of this class will become Oracle connection. So I've given an asterisk next to it, indicating what? That this is not always going to be called connection. It is, in fact, it's never going to be called connection. It will be called what? Based on what database that you're using out here. The name will be different out here. So which is why I've just called it connection. Common name I've given here. In our example, we will call it, for connecting to SQL Server,
MySQL SQL connection.
Server,
SQL.
SQL connection. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
So what can you do with the connection class? You specify the connection string. Connection string would indicate where is your connection, where is your server located, what is the security information where you use while connecting with user ID, password, all of that you give in the connection string, and then you connect to your database. So you first establish a connection with the database. Once you're connected to the database, then you can do the next step out here. So what are the next steps? You need to run a command. So if you want to do an insert, update, delete, select, any of these, the next step is you want to use a command. The command that we're using, this one here, the second one here, would again depend upon
The database.
which database you're using. So if you're using SQL Server, this will now be called SQL command. So the asterisk, wherever I use asterisks, you will be using specific data types out here. So SQL command or Oracle command or MySQL command, depending on what database you're connecting. Now, if you have to run a command that is not returning any values. So typically if you're doing an insert or an update or a delete, then these two are more than enough. Connection command, end of the story, go home. If you're doing a insert, update, delete only, you don't need to do anything else. Create a connection, create a command, done. Okay. But if your command is returning some values, so where would you be returning values?
Again,
When?
we'll be storing it in the database.
No. When would you be returning values from the command? When will the command?
Select query.
When you select queries, if you're running your select queries, then the output of that select query will be, we'll have to fetch that output and then we can, work with that output there. Now, in such cases, you have two options available to you. You can either return the records using a data reader or a data set. So let's first talk about a data reader. Write this down. Write down this three keywords that I'm giving. Data reader is a connected, firstly connected, secondly read only, thirdly forward only set of records. I'll repeat. The data reader is a connected, read only, forward only set of records. Full stop. Okay. Also called as a fire hose cursor. Also called as a fire hose cursor. F-I-R-E fire, H-O-S-E hose. So what is a fire hose?
So it is called a fire hose.
Fire hose cursor, C-U-R-S-O-R.
So it is hose, right? H-O-S-C or H-O-S-T.
Fire. All right.
Fire hose. Okay, sir.
What is a fire hose cursor? First thing is, what is a fire hose? Have you all seen a fireman carrying a pipe?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's called a fire hose.
Mhm.
So what comes out of the fire hose?
Water.
Water.
Water. And that water is not just coming out, it is being pumped out, it is pressurized. So it is being pumped out so that it can reach great distances, so that the fireman need not go very close to the fire. So this fire hose is throwing out water at great speeds. Similarly, the SQL data reader is a fire hose cursor, which is throwing out records at a great speed. It's at a great speed. Now, what are the characteristics of a fire hose cursor? Cursor means nothing else but a set of records. You would have encountered the term cursor before, right?
Yes, sir.
You all know what is a cursor in relation to the database. Nothing is but a set of records. So why is it called a fire hose cursor? What is the characteristics of fire hose cursor? The three characteristics that we talked about, which are what? Connected, read only, and
forward
fire
only.
only. These are the characteristics of a fire hose cursor. If any cursor has these three characteristics, it is called a fire hose cursor. So what does the connected part mean? What does the connected part mean? What do you mean by connected?
Connection with the database.
Yeah. So the connection to the database must be alive, must be there. While reading the records, you have to be connected to the database. If your connection is not open, then you cannot use the data reader. That's what you mean by connected. Data reader needs the connection to be open. Secondly, read only.
Select query.
What does read only imply?
We can only read that, we can't update the data.
Correct. Well said. That data is not updatable. You can only read the data. It's a reader. You can only read the data. You can't make changes in that data while you're reading it. And thirdly, forward only.
It
What
will
does that mean?
it will send the rows in a forward direction. It won't move backwards.
Correct. While reading the values, you can only go in one direction. You can only go ahead. So from the first record, you can only go to the second, then from second only to the third, in that direction. If you're on the third record, you can't go back to the second. Backward going is not allowed. So that is what you mean by forward only. All right. So such type of cursors, such type of record sets are the fastest way of accessing the records. And that's your data reader. So this is one option that you will have. From your connection command, you will create a data reader. And this option you will use maximum in ASP.NET MVC. Maximum. This option will be used. This would be the standard way of reading the records in ASP.NET MVC. You'll be using data readers a lot. Okay. Now we talked about reading records or getting the records. The other way in which you could get the records is instead of getting, by the way, data reader, I didn't mention this, but there's an asterisk next to it, meaning what?
It is different for different databases.
So for SQL Server, this will be called SQL data reader. Okay. Now the other way of reading the records is instead of using a data reader, you can use a data set or a data table, which does not have an asterisk next to it. Okay. The data set, write down these words, write down these keywords. The data set is a disconnected data set is a disconnected, comma, updatable, comma, XML set of records. Data set is, what are the three key characteristics? Disconnected, updatable, and XML set of records. Okay, full stop. Let's try and understand these three terms. What do you understand by disconnected now?
The connection with the database is lost.
While working with the data set, you don't need the connection with the database to be kept open. It will not require the connection with the database out there at all. It's not going to use that at all. Right? Updatable indicates what?
The data is updatable. We can overwrite it.
Right. So unlike the data reader was read only. But data set we said is updatable, which means that you can make changes in this. But if you make changes, remember it is disconnected. So the changes that you're making are not going to go into the database immediately. Why are they not going into the database immediately?
Because it is disconnected.
Because of the disconnected aspect. Right? So whatever changes you're making are being made in the data set only without getting them back to the database immediately. So that is what we mean by updatable and also disconnected. Right? Thirdly, XML set of records. If you notice, I have not put the asterisk next to it. Now the data set will be common for all your databases. If you have SQL Server, MySQL, if you have Oracle, whatever the database you're connecting to, the data set will remain the same. Now, if it has to remain the same, that means the format of the record has to be something that is available to everybody, that is acceptable to everybody. And XML is one such common format. So it saves the data as XML. Are we clear on this? That is your data set. Okay. The data set is not going to be used at all in ASP.NET MVC. In ASP.NET MVC, we'll be using a different technique altogether. So if you're looking purely from the ASP.NET MVC point of view, I'm saying that you will not need to use a data set. But the data set would be used in a lot of other scenarios. Everywhere else. Now, you're not doing those scenarios. In CDAC, we're not doing all of those. But every other scenario will be using a data set. So even though we're not going to use a data set later in our code in CDAC, the data set is a very, very important aspect of ADO.NET. And we will be looking at how this code would work. We will be seeing how this works, even though we're not using it in ASP.NET MVC. We are going to have a look at the data set. It is too important to ignore. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, the data set does not interact with the command directly. Between the data set and the command, you will notice that there's one more object here called as the data adapter,
Data adapter.
which is also a asterisk, indicating what?
Specific to database.
Objective.
So if I'm using SQL Server, this will be SQL data adapter. Now, what is the role of the data adapter? The data adapter is a bridge between the command and the data set. It does two main functions, the data adapter, two major functions. First major function, it reads the values from the command and it fills the data set. You can write the word fill. That's the first major command. It fills the data set. From where? Records from where? From the command. Take the records from the command and fill the data set. Now, whatever the data set contains, if you make any changes in there, these changes are not going to the database immediately. So what are we going to do here in this case? What are the next thing that it's going to do? After fill, what will it do? What does it need to do later? After made some changes, what will it need to do at this point? It needs to update the database. So the data adapter will read the records from the data set, find out what are the changes that are made, and based on the changes, it will go and update the database. So these are the two main functions of the data adapter. Firstly, fill the data set. Secondly, update the database from values in the data set. And of course, to update the values there, it will use a command. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now the data set is a fairly complex entity, and there are more things that I'm going to be adding here for the data set. But I'm not going to do that right now. Our first focus is going to be on the first three objects that we talked about: connection, command, and data reader. We'll work with those three first. Later, then we'll talk about what are the things that are there in the data set. Okay. Any questions before we do that? All right. Also, what I'm going to do with you all is we're going to first create, before we write any code, we're going to first create some, we're going to create a connect to SQL Server, create a database connect, create a few tables in there, and then use those tables in our code. So I'm going to do that with you. So for that part, I'm going to ask you to make sure that if you're connected on the phone, then you need to also have your laptops ready. Where I'm going to ask you to follow me on how to create a database in there, and we do that together. And then you can carry on with the rest of the code separately. So at least the part of creating the tables in there, we will see it together. Okay. So we'll do that, but today's a little longer session, and I don't want to do a 2.5 hour session without a break. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back from the break. Keep your laptops ready. We're going to connect to SQL Server that we have out here. All right. It's about 11:58. So at 12:03, we'll start off again. You have a 5-minute washroom break or whatever else you want. Your SQL Server database and create whatever tables that we need for our session. So can we please open Visual Studio? And you need not go into a new project at this point. You can always say continue without code. So Visual Studio is available to you here. All right. When you install .NET, all right, when you install Visual Studio, rather, let me put it this way, it also installs a free SQL Server for you. Now, this free SQL Server can be used only on your machine. You cannot connect to it from a different machine. It is only available on your machine and is generally used when you're doing development. So while doing development, you connect to this free SQL server. But when you're doing deployment, you cannot be using that on the deployment machine. So there, what you'd be doing is you'll have to purchase the license and buy the license software and work with it. But from a development perspective, the SQL server that we have with Visual Studio is good enough. So I'm going to connect to that SQL server. Please do this with me. Go to the View menu and you have the SQL Server Object Explorer. So go into the SQL Server Object Explorer, where now in my case, there are multiple SQL servers shown out here because I have installed different versions and whatnot. If you have, a local DB/MS SQL local DB, if that is the name that is shown to you, then preferably use that. If that is not there, then you can use any of the other names that are shown to you. Okay. So I'm using local DB/MS SQL local DB. I'm using that one, but you're free to use any other if that name is not shown to you. Okay, one second. One second. Hold on. Yeah, sorry. It's been last couple of days I've been having trouble with my internet. So right now I'm on the hotspot and then the internet guy is trying to fix it. Yeah, so just quickly, do you all have MS SQL local DB?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If anyone does not have that, then use any other name that is shown out there. Is there anyone for whom nothing is shown out there?
I have already have project models.
That's okay. Use that.
Okay, sir.
If you don't have MS SQL local DB, the name it takes, it can take up any name. So
Okay, sir.
if you have that, then use that. If you don't have that, then if you have MS SQL local DB, that's fine. If you don't have that, use the other name. But those who are using the other name will have to make that change in their code. Because in their code, then I'll be using MS SQL local DB. You will have to change that name accordingly in your code. And my question is there anyone for whom it is not installed at all? Nothing is showing up here. No. Okay. So let's go ahead with this. If you can expand on MS SQL local DB or any other name that is shown to you. Under that, it shows up databases. So right click on databases and choose add a new database. Add a new database. The database that we are connecting to is, I'm gonna ask you to give the same name. Let's say JK for Juhu and Khargar, Jan 23. Okay, is what I'm creating. I'll request you to give the same name. The reason being, if my code and your code is the same, if the name is the same, then you can try my code on your machine very easily without having to change anything. So I request you to give the same name for your convenience. Right? So it would have created the database for you. Expand on the databases, on the database name that you have, under which it shows you, different options that are shown out there. Now, we can do this in two ways. We can either, I want to create some tables. We can either create some commands and type out the command directly, or we can use a UI to do this. So I'll show you both options. What if you have to give the command directly? In that case, you right click on your data, on your SQL Server database, whatever, JK Jan 23, and choose new query. Go in for a new query. Now here is where you're getting a code window, and here is where you will create your query. So whatever, create table, whatever, table name, whatever code that you're giving would be given in here. And after typing out the code, there's an option here for execute query, the green sort of play button, sort of, so to say. So you can type out the query and execute the query. Okay. So be aware of this. We're not using it right now, but be aware of this. Okay. Right now, close this and come back. When it asks you to save anything, if you want to save the SQL that you have typed, then you can save it to wherever you want to. If you don't want that SQL, you can just discard it. So I'm saying don't save at this point of time. This is the first way of doing it. The second way of doing it is, do this with me, please. Right click on tables and choose add a new table. Again, right click on tables and add a new table. So it shows you the UI where you can create your tables. So this will be a little easier to use. I'd like you to look at this for a minute, look at me for a minute, look at my screen for a minute, and I'll give you time to type it out. First thing is table name. Table name is what? I'm going to create two tables, departments and employees. So that's my table name. Secondly, the columns here. Now you can either type out the column below in the SQL pane or here on the top. So I'm giving it here, department number, okay, and department name. Department name, I'm keeping it as a varchar 50, don't allow nulls, and I'm ready to work with this. Now, after you finish typing this out, listen to me very carefully. Do not be in a hurry to do it. Listen carefully, look at what I'm doing. I'll give you a minute to complete this. After you finish doing this, what you're expected to do is you're expected to do an update, and in here, click on update database. But sometimes this window doesn't show up correctly. It goes, when you do update, right click and say update. It does not show this window correctly. Now, in such cases, what do? You can copy this code, open that new query that I showed you some time back, and run it from there. So what else could I have also done? If this didn't work, right click, new query, paste this and run it from here. So I can do it from here as well. I'm not running it from there. So this will definitely work. This is for those of y'all who get stuck. If you're not getting stuck, what is the easy option out here? Click on update and it shows you what to update. Update your database. Okay. So this is what I'm expecting you to do. I'm also putting in the chat window what command I have run. Okay. I'm giving you a minute to complete that. Go ahead. Can you all put in a message in the chat window once you're done? All right. So quite a few dones out there. Have a look at the next section and then you can complete it. If you're not finished it, you can do it in the next section. So look at what I'm doing next. Very important. After you finish running the command, if the window is open and you try running another command, it might cause you problems sometimes. So after you finish working with this command, please close the window that you were working on, if it has worked correctly. We have added departments. We are adding one more table called employees. So right click on tables. Do this with me. Right click on tables and add a new table. Okay, add a new table. Now here again, please wait while I show you what I'm doing. So here again, I'm going to do what? Create table employees. That's the table with the columns. The columns now you all are aware of. You'll have been using these columns a lot. So starting with employee number, right? Name and the data types I'm giving here. Basic, which is of type decimal 18,2. The comma 2 would indicate 2 places after the decimal. And department number, which was of type int. Okay. Now I'm not done yet. Hold on. After doing this, please look here for 2 minutes. I'll give you time to complete it. After doing this, right click on foreign keys and add a new foreign key. So when you come down to this section here, it is asking for the foreign key also. And we're going to create a foreign key for department number. So first thing is constraint name, F key employees underscore, let's say departments. This name is not important, it can be anything. Foreign key column. Now what is the foreign key column that I have here? Which column? Yes. Department number.
Department number.
References, which table?
Department table.
Departments. And which column in departments?
Department number.
Department number. Okay. So that's the code that I have written down. After I do this, again, what I'm expecting you to do is what? Do an update and update the database, right? Okay. So I'm again putting the code in the chat window. That is the code that was generated for me. And I'm giving you 2 minutes to complete this. Please put in a done once done.
Sir, it's taking time to.
So I told you what
update.
to do.
Yeah.
I told you what to do. In that case, what do? You just
copy that. Yes.
copy that code and go into that query and run it from there. There it won't take time. Here the UI, the building the UI and all of that takes time. So especially on little slower machines with little lesser memory, if you've got other applications going on, it tends to hang. So I've told you what to do. Try that out then.
And we have to execute query there.
Correct. There's a green sort of play
Yes,
sort
yes.
of button out there.
Okay, done, sir.
And yeah, and below it will give you a confirmation message if there are any syntax errors or whatever, it will show up there.
Yeah, it shows completed successfully.
Yeah, then you're good to go.
Yes, sir.
If someone is getting stuck and needs my help, please call out to me. I don't mind showing you what to do.
Sir, so for the previous screen, which we wrote in the UI, so there we have to don't save it. Click
Yeah,
on don't save.
because it is saving the SQL that you've written.
Okay.
It's asking you, do you want to save it so you can open it next time?
Okay. So no need as such
Yeah,
because
so
I have already done.
yeah, it's just the commands that you're given. It is not nothing to do with the data. It is the commands that you're given, whether you want to save them into a SQL file or not, which you can open next time again.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm seeing very few dones out here. Are you all getting stuck somewhere? I need a little more, feedback from you all. Either shouldn't take you so long to get this done. So either put in a done or say I'm stuck somewhere or whatever. All right, 30 seconds more for everybody to finish. A lot of dones now coming in. So you're stuck at creating the database. Who's that, Namita? So what is the problem? What is it showing?
Sir, I want you to repeat it again. If you
Okay.
can.
So
Add new
started off with, when you click on the database, you start with add a new database.
Yes,
Give it
sir.
a name. We are giving it a name of JK Jan 23. So give that name.
Yes, sir.
Say OK. Once it says OK, it will show you that database.
Yes, sir.
Expand on the database, right click on tables, choose add a new table and do this. But now I'll suggest, because you're so far behind, can you just pick up the two queries that I've given you there? Can you
Yes,
just
sir.
the two queries? And what you can do is you can right click on this and choose a new query. And the code I have first given you for departments and then for employees.
Yes,
it's in
sir.
the chat window earlier in your chat.
Yes, sir.
And right click new query and you can run that query. Just copy paste this query, copy this one, paste it here and run it here. That'll create departments. Similarly, create one more for employees.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. So I'm presuming people are done at this point. So now close this window. Again, I've told you that after you've finished running the command, you need to close the window. And the table should have been created here. It should show you on the left-hand side, it'll show you your tables. So I'm going to ask you to enter a few dummy records in here. So let's start with departments. Can you please right click on departments and choose view data? So view data will show you that there's no data in there currently. And let's enter a couple of records. Now the data need not be the same thing that I'm entering. You can enter any dummy records that you want. Okay. The only thing to remember is look at this for a second. If you're in the middle of editing the record, now this record doesn't get saved until you go to some other record. So after you type out that record, just go to any other record and the record gets saved.
Where we have to click, like in department table.
Right click and view data. And then you go here, after you're typing on whatever row you're typing on, to save it, just go to any other row. Just go to any other row and then the value gets saved. Okay. The second thing that we're doing here is finish working with it, close it. Second thing, also in employees, I'm going to add a few records. Okay. Now the things to remember here is the department number is the foreign key. So be careful while adding that. Needs to be a valid department number in the departments table, and add 2-3 records out here also, just as dummy data, which we'll use out here. So just add a couple of records out here. Okay, so I just added Abhi Pratik and another name that I see here is Tarun. Okay, so here's where we are. Here's where we all are. Okay, you got exactly 30 seconds to finish doing what you're doing, and we're going to go on with the next part of it. If you're not able to add records right now, it doesn't matter. You can add them later as well. Okay. So we have managed to create the tables, put in some dummy data there. Let's now turn our attention to the code. So what I want to do is I want to write some code to connect to the database and do your basic, CRUD operations, insert, update, delete, select. All of this I would like to do. So let's go in for a new project. File menu, new project. Now while doing this, some of the steps I'll ask you to do with me, but you may not be possible for you to keep up with my code. I will be coding at a much faster pace. So don't attempt to pick up with the code. Don't miss the explanations. Whatever I'm asking you to do with me. But don't try to finish the code also right now. It may not be possible. So go in for a new project. And the project that we're using is a console app. All right. What day are we on? 12 are we on?
Day 12.
Day 12. And let's call this as databases. Right, and create this. All right. Can you all tell me what is the first thing that I will need to do out here? What is the
Connection,
first thing? Sorry?
connection.
To establish a
Establishing
connection.
connection.
Before connection also. Before writing a word of code.
System.data.sql client.
Include
That is,
packages.
darling, that is for not .NET framework. For .NET Core, what will we use? What do we need to do?
Microsoft.data.sql client. Nugget you'll have to install.
So we'll have to do the NuGet on that. Are we clear on this, everybody? We'll have to first get that library. So I'm not sure how many of you have done this yesterday, but please do this with me, what I'm doing next. Right? We're going to install this Microsoft.data.sql client, NuGet library out here. So go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and manage NuGet packages for solution. Okay. Now in here, installed shows you what are the NuGet packages that are currently installed. Click on Browse and give out the library that you're looking out for, which is Microsoft.data.sql client. Are we clear on this? So that's the one that we have picked up.
Repeat?
Tools menu, NuGet package manager, manage NuGet packages for solution. In that, go to Browse. Under Browse, type out Microsoft.data.sql client and press enter. So this should actually be shown up here, Microsoft.data.sql client. Now look here for a second what I'm doing. Look at my screen. I'll give you time to do that also. So once you select this library, you select the project for which you want it to be installed. It shows you the current status is not installed. And there's an option here which shows you what is the latest stable version. So always pick up the latest stable version and install this. So when you install it, it will firstly ask you for confirmation. Do you accept the terms and conditions? You have no option. You have to accept. You don't have an option of saying no. So choose I accept. At this point, it is downloading the files that you require and installing them. Now, I have already done it before on my system. So in my system, it happened very quickly. In your system, it might take a few seconds to do that, to get the files from the server and to install them out here. All right, and that's what it will do out here for you. At the end of it, it should have shown you a successful message saying that it's finished installing. Once you're done with that, we're ready to start with the code. So I'm waiting for a minute to get some response from you all. Can you all again please give me a yes, done or not done response, so I know what is happening with you once it's finished installing.
Sir, we are actually getting an option Microsoft Data SQL Client.sni runtime.
It might be up in the list. Just scroll up in the list.
Sir, how I check is it install or not?
When you go to the NuGet package manager, there's an option here for installed. It shows you what are the options that are installed.
Okay, sir.
Okay, while you all are doing that, I'm going to try switching to my other network and seeing whether I can join back. So it will take me 30 seconds to do that. I might get disconnected. I will join you back shortly. All right, checking audio, video. Can you all hear me, see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm carrying on from this point on. Now I'm going to go at a little quicker pace, and you guys are
Hello.
not going to be.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
Sir, what we have to do after selecting Microsoft.data.sql client?
there's an option there for button for install. On the right hand side, you select the project for which you want to install it.
Okay. And database also, sir?
No, hold on 1 second. So you went into browse, you did Microsoft.data.sql client, right? You
Yes,
chose that project, you select this project, and then now in my case it's already installed, but in your case there'll be a button here called install, which will allow you to install it.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right, so everybody back here now. Now I'm not waiting for you all. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and write down the code. You will not be able to keep up with my pace. Do not attempt to write the code right now. Do it later. Focus on the explanations, focus on what needs to be done. Wherever I am required to do something, I will tell you do it with me. But otherwise, right now, don't try to do it with me. We have got the NuGet package installed. Now, I'm going to write code for working with this. So first thing, of course, using Microsoft.data.sql client. That's the library that we're using to connect to SQL Server. I'm going to also require using system.data. So there are certain classes available in system.data that are also used out here in my code. So which is what I'm doing. These are the two namespaces that I've given the top on using. The first thing that I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to connect to my database to see whether it is properly connecting or not. Okay. And I have to create what object? First thing, what object would I need to create? Can you help me with the code? What object would I need to create?
Connection.
Don't just say connection.
My SQL connection.
SQL connection. SQL connection. Now, because we're using SQL Server, SQL connection.
Okay.
So SQL connections CN is equal to new SQL connection. Now, with the connection, these are the things that you'll need to do. You will need to specify a connection string. You'll need to specify cn.open. And if it works, maybe a message just to say that no, all was okay. And lastly, cn.close to close the connection if you don't need it anymore. So these are the things that you'll need to do. Now, how do you know what is the connection string? I know it because I've used it a million times already. how do you know what is the connection string that we'll be using? So this is what you do. Look at my screen. Don't do it right now. Look in, you can do it later. If you see JK Jan 23, that's my database that I'm connecting to. Right click on this and go into the properties. In the properties, one of the properties there is the connection string. And you can copy the connection string and paste it out here. Okay. So this is what we're doing out here to get the connection string. Now, there are a lot of things that are shown in the connection string which I don't need. So let's identify what are the sections that we do need. First thing it shows you there is the data source. Can you look at this and tell me what do you think this is giving you? Data source. What do you think this is giving you?
Database URL.
The name of the SQL server. Data source is the name of the SQL server that you're connecting to. So in my case, it was MS SQL local DB. I don't know. Some of you all said that I don't have MS SQL local DB. This would now be what? Whatever, projects V13, project models, whatever the name of your database that you have. Secondly, it's showing me an error here. Why is it showing me an error here?
Escape sequence.
So how do I avoid the error?
Or
Either give a double slash, or easy option is to do what? Give an @ at the beginning. All right. So the first thing, data source was the name of your SQL server. The second part, initial catalog. What do you think this is telling me?
name of the database.
Right. The name of the database that you're connecting to. Now, the third thing that you have there is integrated security equal to true. Now, let's try and understand what this does for you. Okay. Now, after giving the database, the SQL server name, the database name, the third possibility is you have to give in the user ID and password. Right? So you need to give in the user ID and password. Okay. But this option of user ID and password is only available for that paid version of SQL Server. This is not available for this free version of SQL Server. So typically in a production environment, your SQL Server will be located on another machine, not on your laptop, not on your desktop. It'll be located on another machine and you'll be connecting to that machine. So you'll give in, for example, you'll give in the IP address of that machine and then the name of the SQL server. And here you will give the user ID and password that you're using to connect to SQL Server. Now on this current machine, we don't have that feature. So what do they use instead? They use a feature called as integrated security. Integrated security says that whatever you have logged in Windows as. So when you started off your Windows, you're asked to log in first, correct? So some of you have logged in as an administrator, for example. So whatever you're logged into Windows as, that username will be accepted in SQL Server. And this is called as integrated security. It is also called Windows authentication or integrated security. So this free version of SQL Server only supports integrated security. The paid version of SQL Server instead would have what? User ID and password. Are we clear on this, everybody? So these are the things that we'll be using. So I'm giving you both the connection strings, but right now what we need to use is what? Integrated security equal to true. Now there are a lot of other things in the connection string. You don't need any of them. These are the three basic things that you will need. First is, I'll repeat, data source is what? Data source is what?
Name of SQL server that you are connecting to.
Correct. Initial catalog is what?
Name of the database.
And the third is you can either give user ID and password or give integrated security. Integrated security uses Windows authentication. User ID and password uses SQL Server authentication. Once we are given this, we are ready to go. Now, what might happen here? What could be the possibility here when you're trying to write down this code? There's a possibility that your code may not work. So always put this in the try catch block. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, an exception would be thrown. And in the catch, what you would do is try and find out why the exception occurred. In either case, whether an exception occurred or didn't occur, what do you want to finally do? Finally do what?
Close the
Close
connection.
the connection. Now, if the connection has not been opened and you try to close it, it does not give an error. It just simply says that, okay, ignore it. If it is open, I'll close it. If not open, if you give cn.close, no problem. So this is the type of code that we are going to be running out. I should get one of the two messages. Either I should get an okay or I should get the error message why it was not okay. Let me try running this. I'm calling this connect method from my main function. All right. So in this case, hopefully it was okay. Right? Things worked okay. Now, what if, for example, if I give a wrong database name? I'm getting initial catalog is equal to JK Jan, for example. And if I try running this now, it will show you why the message, why it could not connect to that database. Right? So cannot open the database JK Jan requested by the login. The login failed. Are we clear on this, everybody? So obviously my name of the database was wrong, but that was the error message that came out. So that's how you would connect to the database. Any queries, any questions about any of this?
No, sir.
All right. Now, once you're connected, what is the next step now? What do we want to now do?
SQL
SQL
command.
command.
SQL command. Now run your SQL command. So what I'm going to try and do here is I'm going to try and insert a record out here. Okay. And the initial bulk of the code, I'll keep it the same and I'll add on the code for insert. So once connected, let's try and insert. Okay, now I'm removing the unnecessary comments that were there in the first one. All right, give me the code for that, please. What happens next? I'm removing the okay out here. I know it's working fine. Next step, what do we do? Create what? Create what?
SQL command.
SQL command. So SQL command CMD or CMD insert, let's say, is equal to new SQL command. First thing we're going to give here is CMD insert dot connection is equal to the connection that we are using on top. This connection object we are using out here. Second thing that we're going to specify here is the command type that we are giving here. Now, what are the command types that you can give out here? The command type that you can specify here is an enumeration, which could either be a stored procedure or a table direct or text. Ideally, first choice should always be stored procedure. Stored procedures would be the best way of writing code because the code has already been written at the database level. It has been tried, tested, pre-compiled code, and you're just calling it from here. So you're reusing that code. So first choice should always be a stored procedure. Now, in certain cases, you may not have the stored procedure and you may not have permissions to make a stored procedure. So you as a developer may or may not, in a large project, sometimes you don't have the permissions to do that. So supposing you want to run a command, but there is no stored procedure which is available for doing that. Then the next option should be what? Try to write your own command text. But first option always, without fail, should always be a stored procedure. Okay. The third option out here called table direct that we are giving here. This is mainly included for backward compatibility, wherein here you can give the whole name of the table. You give the whole table name out here, and then it's able to pick up values from there. But we're not going to use that table direct at all. It is more to do with backward compatibility than any other code that we actually write out here. To begin with, I'm not using a stored procedure. Let's start with text. Text is what? You give your own SQL statement here itself. You don't use a stored procedure. To begin with, we are doing this, but I don't want you to do this. I want you to always use
Stored procedures.
stored procedures. Only use text if not anything else is available. Right? And the next thing is the command text. So command text is your actual command, the statement that you will give in here. So insert into employees, values, and whatever values you'd like to give. So I think I have 3 records out here. Okay. And who else is joining? One of my favorite students. Who's this? Abhishek. Who else? Who's missing? Who else keeps the camera on all the time?
Yogesh.
Yogesh, where is he? Yogesh, where is he? Is he there? Yogesh. Missing today. Okay. So anyway, employee number 4, Yogesh. Right? And whatever.
Department number.
And the department number. Okay. So this is what we are doing. So we're just trying out dummy data. And to actually insert the command, you would have a cmd insert dot execute non-query. So execute non-query is actually running this command that you're giving in here. Execute non-query returns an integer value telling you how many records were affected. The number of records affected. So in case of an insert, 1 record would be inserted, 1 record would be affected. So we generally don't need to use the return type from execute non-query. If everything worked, it should show me an OK. If it gave an error, it should show me an exception message out here. Any questions about this before we try running this?
Sir, foreign key, sir. Department number is our foreign key.
Yeah.
So
I have a department number 10.
Okay.
I have a department 10 in my database. But yes, if you had not given a valid value, then it would show up a foreign key violation. So let's try doing an insert. Yeah, any other query?
Sir, this execute non-query, can you re-explain what is this part?
It's for running your action queries. Insert, update, delete. To run the query, you will call a execute non-query.
So you said it will return int value, right?
It returns the number of records affected.
Okay.
So if you run an insert, it will reflect insert. Supposing right now ran an update which updated 1 value, it will all return 1. If you wrote an update which updated 5 records, it will return 5.
It's similar to the databases. After every update, we used to get
so many
them.
records affected, right?
Yes.
Same thing. All right. So let's try running this. And if it was okay, that means Yogesh could get into our database. If I run this second time, now at this point, Yogesh is in my database. Right? How do I check this? If you view data out here, you'll find that the 4th record has been added out here. So at this time, Yogesh is in my database. So if I try running the same code again, now in this case, employee number 4 again would cause a problem, and that's your violation of primary key constraint. So there is a possibility that while writing code, you don't give either the correct command or the correct data. Don't freeze if you get an error. Read the error message and see what the problem is. Is it a problem because your syntax was wrong, or is it a problem because the data that you had in there was wrong? Read from the error message. Don't panic and don't freeze and don't say now my code is not working. All right. So this is how we did a insert. Any questions about this, everybody?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, why do we need to establish the connection again in the insert method? We already established the connection in the connect method.
I'm not calling it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm just showing you how to connect, how to insert all of that individually. I'm not calling that.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay. And secondly, even if I had called connect here, that connection object is not global. I'll need to make it global if I want to use it in insert. That's another thing I'll need to do. No? That connection object was only local variable here. When the function was over, it's over. Understood what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I'm going to try out one more insert, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an employee class and pass an employee object to this and then try my insert. So instead of hard coding values there, I will receive an employee object, and based on the values in the employee object, I will do that. So this is something that we have. Okay, it does show me that. Okay. So commenting out this insert. Creating an object of the employee class, employee whatever, obj equal to new employee. And let me pass some values here. In the object initializer, maybe I could pass them. Employee number equal to add 4 already, right? So let me start with 5. What else? Name
Employee name.
equal to someone else. Who else? Who else answers questions? Okay, I see Suraj's name out on top. So whatever name that I'm seeing on top. All right. Basic equal to some value, and finally department number equal to 20. Okay. Now this object I'm going to be passing to my insert. So I'm going to just make a simple small copy of this. I'm not deleting the earlier code. I'm keeping the earlier code and adding on more code. And let's call this insert employee, for example, which takes an employee as a parameter, right? And let's call insert employee, passing to it the object that we have just created on top. Okay. Changes here. Instead of hard coding the values here, what would I now do? Read the values from
The object passed.
object. So all that I'm doing here is instead of 4, this would be from obj dot employee number. Instead of Yogesh, now this becomes obj dot
Name.
name. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this becomes
Obj dot basic.
and similarly obj dot department number. Right. So this is what we have, and finally this one. Curly brackets. Obj. What am I using out here? This is basically an example of string interpolation. You all have used that before, right? And let's see whether we can do this or not. So insert employee with the object that I passed out, right? And Suraj works okay, perfectly okay. Obviously, if I try running him again, then it will give you a primary key violation. Okay. All right. Now, before I carry on, I generally do this a lot. I mean, see, when I started coding, I mean, I'm getting emotional now about thinking about this. When I started coding many years back, and I was learning databases also at that time, I was sitting with a friend of mine. We would sit together and we would code, and then like you all code together. Like sometimes I see the code is same in two or more people. So I asked, how do you do that? We coded together. That is the answer that I get. So even me and my friend used to code together. You know, I would write one sentence, one line of code. He would write the next line of code. Sometimes I would write one word of code. He would write the next word of code. Sometimes I would write one letter. He would write the next letter. I would code with my left hand. He would code with his right hand. Like, you know, like you all code together. This friend of mine is a dear friend of mine. He's still alive. I mean, he's not gone anywhere. His name was Sabio. Right? So whenever we work with database, I always like, you know, remember my friend and I want to put his record into my database. Right. So with your permission, you know, I'm going to add Sabio to our database, right? Just for old time's sake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's put him as employee number 6. And actually there were 2 Savios in my class. All right. So 2 Savios in this. One was Savio Briganza and the other one was Savio D'Souza. So you would always call him by the full name, Savio D'Souza. Right. And let's try and put him into our database. So employee number 6, Savio D'Souza, and let's run and okay. What happened?
Backtick.
It says incorrect syntax in your Souza. All of a sudden, how did it become incorrect syntax?
Because like single quote caused the error in D'Souza.
Backslash we need to use.
Right. So the problem here now is that if your data contains any special characters, it causes you an issue. I'll show you what is happening here. So before we, you know, try to insert it, console.writeline command insert dot command text. Let me try printing this and console dot readline. Okay, let me do this. When I run this now, the command that is being trying to run is as follows: insert into employees value 6. And now with the Savio D'Souza having a quote in there, the single quote at the beginning is being terminated with the single quote that we had with D'Souza. And then the name is being taken as Savio D. So the name is Savio D, then what happens to Souza, right? Therefore, it says incorrect syntax near Souza. Right? Now, this is a situation that could happen often in your code, wherein you have special characters coming. Not just this, there's another serious problem with string concatenation. And the serious problem with string concatenation is that you leave yourself open to SQL injection attacks. So what is SQL injection? SQL injection is where if you're accepting a value from the user enters in the value that he's entering, he enters some SQL. And that SQL that he enters changes the way in which your query is run. Now I'm way over time. I'm not going to show you. Otherwise, I generally spend half an hour, 45 minutes trying to explain to you how SQL injection works, but I cannot afford to do that. So I could have, if I'm accepting this value from the user, I could have actually inserted a SQL in between to make the query do weird things. And that's what hackers do to get into your system. So whenever you use string concatenation in any form, you leave yourself open to 2 problems. What are the 2 problems? First problem is special characters in the input. Second problem is SQL injection attacks. So we should never use string concatenation of everything. Are we clear on this? No situation. Don't ever use this. Instead, write code in a different way. So what is the different way? How do you avoid this problem? How do you, now take these values? You have to use something called as parameters. So let's see how we can do the same thing with parameters. I've shown you this just for the sake of showing you what not to do. I don't ever expect you to write down code in this manner. Okay. So let's change this to insert with parameters. Right. All right. Now, what would my statement look like? See this? I'm saying insert into employees values, and these values that we had given in here are going to change, and I'm going to use parameters. Arey, he's my best friend. He's a good school friend. The Savio exists, he's talking. I have many friends, like this, which I keep inserting in database, and they're all real. You're hurting my sentiments by asking whether Savio exists. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Huh.
I
don't
thought
know
it
who
was
listens.
just for story build-up.
No. Arey, my dear friend of mine, I told you, one word I would code, one word he would code. I mean, Savio very much exists, alive and kicking. Yeah. So what are we doing here? Forget about that. Let's talk about this. So you have @employee number. So this @employee number is your parameter. Begins with an @ and then name can be anything. It doesn't have to be employee number only. It can be A, B, C, D, E, whatever the case might be. Right? @name, comma, @basic and @department number. These are the 4 parameters that we are given in here. Okay. Now the parameters, before you execute the query, the parameters need to be given values. And to do that, every command has a collection called parameters. So CMD insert dot, there's a collection called parameters. Now if it's a collection, then means what are you going to do now with the collection? Any collection? 3 things that come to mind.
Add,
Collection of objects.
Add, remove, count.
add,
So in
remove,
this-
count.
Yeah, so in this case, add, and there are 2 overloads. There's an add and there's an add with value. So I'm going to use add with value here. So add with value @employee number. That's the name of the parameter and the value. Values coming in from where? Values coming in from where?
Object.
Object,
obj dot
Object.
employee number.
employee number.
Right? So this is the first parameter, and then we need to do this for all the parameters. So we have employee number, name, basic, and department number. So repeat it for all the 4 parameters. Right? That's all that I need to do.
Department number.
Thank you. Would have given me an error, right? Saying that department number has not been defined. All right. Other things remain exactly the same. The way in which you're running the query and everything else works exactly the same. The only difference is now my dear friend Savio can enter my database. Let's try running this. And all right, so this went out okay. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is what we are done out here with insert with parameters. Questions, if any? Clear on this?
Yes, sir.
This also handles SQL injection problems. So don't ever use
String interpolation.
string concatenation of any sort. Right? Not just with .NET, anywhere else. Anywhere else. Don't use that. You're leaving yourself open to both these problems. Special characters and secondly what? SQL injection, which is even more serious. Okay. Anyway. Now, so far we have been working with, directly giving the command text out here. So instead of giving the command text out here, we're going to do the same thing with the stored procedure. Right? We're going to do the same thing with the stored procedure. And for this section, I would like you to do this with me, please. We will create the stored procedure at the database together, and then I'll call it from here. So the calling of the code, you all don't worry about, but creation of that stored procedure at the database level. Let's see how we can create it out here. So can we please all go to SQL Server again? Do this with me, please. Everybody. And in SQL Server, you would have a section called programmability. Under your database, there's a section called programmability, under which you have stored procedures. Right? Have you all located that? I hope you all are doing this with me. So right click on stored procedures and choose add a new stored procedure. Right click on stored procedures and choose add a new stored procedure. Right? Do this with me. Please do this together. Create procedure and the procedure name. So I'm calling my procedure as insert employee. Stored procedure name, I'm calling it as insert employee. Please do this with me. And the statement that I'm giving in here would be the same statement that I gave some time back, which use parameters. Okay. Now hold on for a minute. Now don't do what I'm doing. Look at what I'm doing, and I'll give you time to complete that. Please look at my screen next. So the parameters that you're giving in here need to be defined here first. That's why it's giving an error. All that I'm going to do here is going to go and specify these parameters. The employee number, which is of type int. Any idea what the equal to 0 would do? What is this doing? Equal to 0?
Initialize it to 0.
Default values. Default values. So I don't want default values, and I would recommend that you don't use default values at all. Okay, because it might mess up your code. Then second one was @name. Nobody's typing. If you all are looking at what I'm doing, this
50.
here would match what you have in the database. Whatever the database columns are there, right? Please give in the same values out here. Right? And lastly, the last one here is department number, which is of type int. Right? Okay. Go ahead, complete that. I am putting the same thing in the chat window as well. All right. So once you're finished typing that, now I'm not waiting for you. Please look at what I'm doing next. Let me complete what I want to do with you. So once you're finished this, what do we do next is update. Again, update the database, and the stored procedure would have been created. Okay. Let's come back to the code. And nobody's doing any code there. Please look at what I'm doing. You can complete this section later. So in the stored procedure code, can you identify here what are the changes that I will require? Can you identify the changes that I will require here? Which line number would I need the change on?
Line number 126.
Correct. So instead of command type dot text, now this changes to command type
Stored
dot
procedure.
stored procedure.
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 Secondly, the command text itself now will not be the entire this, instead will be the
Procedure
name
name.
of the stored procedure, which was insert employee, and the parameters that you have here, the parameters that you have in the stored procedure, right? The parameter names that you give here will have to match the parameter names that the stored procedure has. So now you can't give any random names. These names have to match the names that are there in the stored procedure. Are we clear on this, everybody? Other than that, there are no changes in what code we wrote down. So how do we call the function? How do we execute the function? Same way, execute non-query.
Sir, in line 127, do we have to write store procedure as well?
127.
Command text.
I'm giving the name of the stored procedure.
Okay, as a command text.
Yes.
Okay.
The stored procedure, I have called it as what? Insert employee.
Mhm.
So this is the name of the stored procedure.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is what we've done out here. Everything else is fine. Everything else is fine. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, what I have not told you so far is that while Savio sat on my right, there's another good friend of mine who sat on the left, right? And I don't forget him also. His name was Peter De Silva. Right? So I don't like to leave Peter out as well. And we're going to try doing this, of course, now with instead of insert with params, we're going to do this with insert with
Stored procedures.
stored procedure. All right, and let's see whether Peter can enter our database or not. So if we run this now, then if everything is okay, then okay should show up. And to show you what is happening here in the view data, now we have Savio and Peter as well. You want me to show me on the phone whether Peter exists?
No, sir.
Huh. You just don't trust what I'm saying. I'm giving you such a nice, heartwarming, right from my, childhood memory, a story, and you're saying, does Savio exist? Okay. Anyway, so here is where I'm going to sort of sign off for this session. But that's not all that I'm going to do with you. I'm going to ask you to do a few more things. So here's what you need to do. You need to right now focus only on databases. Ignore that other code that we did with reflection. You do that later at the end of the day, whenever you have time. Right now, the focus is on doing what we've done in class. So you have to practice all the code that we've done so far. You have to try out all these things. All right. Now, I have written code for insert employee. I've written it for insert employee with parameters and with stored procedure both. You have to do it in this time now, before the next session begins. You have to do it not just for insert, but for update and delete as well. Now you're going to try it out with command text also, and you're going to try it out with stored procedure also. So you have to create both of these. Are we clear on this, everybody? So don't stop at insert. Please give me an update and a delete as well. Can you give me the code for update? What will be your update statement? We'll be using. Don't do it with string concatenation. Okay. Try insert with string concatenation, but update and delete not with string concatenation. With parameters. So give me the statement for update.
CMD insert context equals to update into employees where
Wrong syntax. Somebody give me the correct syntax, please.
Update employee set column name and what we have to set.
No, but that is the general syntax. Give me the exact syntax. Don't say you give an update table name, set column name, done. Give me the exact syntax, which I'll be giving in here.
CMD insert dot command text equal to update employee set names equals to something where employee ID is this, like that.
Again, no, give me the whole syntax. Update.
Update employee
Hmm.
set emp set name equals to, we can consider any name.
No.
Okay, Raj.
At the rate EMP number. Yeah.
Again,
at the
start
rate
again. Who was that? Trunal was answering.
Yes, sir.
And start again.
Okay. CMD insert dot command text equals to update employee set at the rate emp at the rate name.
No. Start again.
Update set.
Who's answering? Shivani. Go ahead.
CMD dot command text update set employees.
Wrong. Start again. Someone else.
So in update employee set employee number equals to at the rate
Wrong.
EMP number.
Wrong. We never change the primary key field. Start again.
CMD insert dot command text in quotation update employees set name equals to in quotation or whatever we just want to give. Suppose at the rate name.
Don't talk essays to me. Give me the syntax. Whatever you want to give, we will give whatever, you give whatever. I don't want long stories. I have given you enough long stories today. I want the exact syntax.
Update employees set name equals to at the rate name where at the rate employee number.
Wrong. Start again.
Okay, employee number.
Start again.
Okay. Update employees set name equals to at the rate name where employee number equals to at the rate employee number.
Okay, finally one. All right. Okay, now can you, who gave this answer?
Shovik, this is Shovik.
Okay. So he gave me the answer correct for updating only one column. Can you elaborate on that and give me all the columns to be updated? Except
sir.
employee number, of course.
Yes, sir.
Rion,
Set,
call it again.
sir, update employee set name equals to at the rate name.
Set name equal to
At the rate name.
Rion.
Comma basic is equal to at the rate basic.
Carry on.
Comma department number is equal to at the rate department number.
Very good. Carry on.
Where employee number is equal to at the rate employee number.
Perfect. That is what I want. Where employee number equal to at the rate employee number. We're not going to update the primary key column. So this is what your update statement would look like. Can I have delete without making mistakes? Who would like to go? Somebody, anyone, delete? No mistakes button. No one?
Delete from employees where
Wrong. Start again. Next one.
Delete employees where employee number is equal to at the rate employee number.
Delete from employees.
No,
Delete
here
employees.
employee number is equal to at the rate employee number.
right? Delete from employees, delete employees. What is it?
Delete from employees.
Delete from employees. Okay. Now, in the case of update, how many parameters would you need?
All parameters, what we want to update and where do we want to
In
update.
case of delete,
Only ID.
all right. All right. What I'd like you all to do is, I'm going to upload the code. So create stored procedures just like you did for insert employee. You're going to create stored procedures for
Insert department.
update employee and delete employee. So you're going to try this out with all of the options, all of the commands, and then I'm going to take it further in the next session. Right. So next session, we have seen this. We're going to take it further and try out other things that we have. Right. All right. Any questions, any doubts before we wind up for now? All right. So enjoy your lunch and see you.